So at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Meenakshi for making me a part of this interesting IC. I'll be talking about secondary glaucomas in children. Uh, so as we know, secondary glaucoma in children is a heterogeneous group of disorders which are characterized by increased intraocular pressure due to underlying ocular or systemic conditions. Unlike primary congenital glaucoma, secondary glaucoma arises from identifiable acquired cases such as causes such as trauma, inflammation, or even developmental abnormalities or with or without syndromic associations. So we have this recent CGRN classification, and the CGRN classifies secondary glaucoma as glaucoma associated with non-acquired ocular anomalies, glaucomas associated with non-acquired systemic anomalies, glaucomas with acquired conditions like trauma, uveitis, steroids, and glaucomas following cataract surgeries. So the common conditions with non-acquired ocular anomalies include AR anomaly, Peters anomaly, aniridia, microphthalmos, PPCD, etc., so on and so forth. And with non-acquired systemic anomalies, we have various syndromes like Marfan syndrome, Weil-Marchesani syndrome, Lowe syndrome, homocystinuria, Sturge-Weber syndrome, etc. So for diagnosis of secondary glaucoma in children, a detailed history is very, very important, and to differentiate it from the primary congenital glaucoma. So the presenting complaints and their duration should be noted. And then the family history, birth history, and history of consanguineous marriage is very, very important. Also, to rule out secondary causes, one needs to ask a history about trauma, steroid use, or previous surgeries, and any systemic associations. So in very young children where they are not cooperative for examination, examination under anesthesia is the first step, and you should be handy with all the equipment and gadgets to do the examination under anesthesia. And since we also perform genetic testing, blood should be drawn at the time of EUA. And so we measure the intraocular pressure with either Perkins or eye care, and examine the children under operating microscope or with handheld slit lamp, and documentation of anterior segment findings with the help of camera is very, very important. Gonioscopy is very, very useful in identifying primary from secondary causes, whether the PAS are secondary to any surgery or they are broad based, whether there is excessive pigmentation, bridging synechia, or wrap around incision. We also have UBM handy in our and B scan in our OT, and it is very beneficial in hazy cornea because you can differentiate between primary and secondary. And as you can see, when there is extensive corneal opacity, UBM can help you to see the iris, lens, and ciliary body. This particular patient where we were not sure, UBM showed cataractous lens with anterior lens attached to the back of cornea, so suggesting Peters anomaly. So UBM is very, very important if you are managing primary causes, primary glaucomas. And B scan, of course, I think you can measure eggshell length with B scan, and you can even find out about posterior segment pathologies like retinoblastoma or underlying retinal detachment. Systemic examination is a must and should be documented in syndromic glaucomas like Sturge-Weber, Rieger syndrome, Peters, neurofibromatosis, and this is one particular interesting case, Rubinstein-Tayari syndrome with typical hand and features of hand and foot. So now I just present some cases and specific conditions which we do see commonly. So glaucoma is associated with aphakia and pseudophakia. So it's a serious complication after childhood glaucoma cataract surgery, and the incidence varies from 2 to 60%. And a longer follow-up has been associated with higher incidence of glaucoma because the glaucoma can present quite late, and the incidence remains high despite microsurgical techniques. So nowadays with the refined microsurgical techniques, the angle closure type of glaucoma in children is very, very rare, but if it is there, it presents quite early, and the most common cause is pupillary block. More common in 90 up to 94% cases is open angle type, and usually it presents pretty late, and the average reported time is 6 to 7 years. So when you encounter these children, you realize there are these very specific findings where there is fibrous membrane over the iris, over the lens, and ectropion uvea, and even opacification of the lens. So these are typical findings which predispose the eye to develop glaucoma. This was one case who was operated very young, 6 months of age, and over a period of time I have been following him up for the last 15 years, and you can see the change in the refractive error and also the axial length, and over a period of time the pressure started rising, more so in the left eye, and you can see from -8 he had become -24, and he was on maximal medical therapy and then surgical management also, and these were the findings. So left eye was more involved, and the glaucoma developed 9 years after primary cataract surgery. Another patient, very advanced glaucoma, again developed glaucoma after 11 years of primary cataract surgery. So you have to keep following up these patients, especially if there are risk factors like surgery at very young age, cataract surgery at very young age, microcornea, or if there are any additional surgeries. Again, this one associated with aniridia, central corneal opacity, and history of membranectomy, and glaucoma was diagnosed 3 years after primary cataract surgery. So these are the risk factors, as I already said: microcornea, aniridia, if there is pH, associated PHPV, or if there is retained lens protein or lens particle. So most of these cases we start the treatment with medical management first, and they respond pretty well, but some of them do require surgical management, and trabeculectomy and GDDs are the most commonly done surgeries. This is another patient who was diagnosed as CHED because he had diffusely hazy cornea, and even the DD could be primary congenital glaucoma, but when we examine the systemic features, you can see that the typical facies where there was telecanthus, depressed, nasal bridge, bulbous nose, long philtrum, and short stature and short neck, and he also had kyphoscoliosis. So he was diagnosed to have mucopolysaccharidosis, and you do these enzyme assays for the measurement of urinary gags, and enzyme therapy can help these children. So systemic evaluation is very, very important because DD can be primary or congenital glaucoma or even CHED. So Sturge-Weber is a sporadic developmental disorder, and sometimes the patients present pretty early, and this history was taken by our genetic counselor, and this child has repeated episodes of scissors and port wine stain, and he also developed cataract, and he had intellectual disability. He was not even able to hold neck when he was 3 to 4 years old, and that could be because of the associated birth event due to eventful birth history. So basically glaucoma is almost ipsilateral to the facial port wine stain, and choroidal hemangioma is also common in 20-30% of the patients, and glaucoma could be because of trabecular dysgenesis or raised episcleral venous pressure. So as I said, there may be associated seizures, mental retardation. So systemic evaluation is a must, and multi-systemic consult with a neurologist, pediatrician, even neurosurgeons and geneticists is very, very important. And for ophthalmologist, topical medication versus surgery, but if it is present since birth in early age, surgery is the treatment of choice, and propranolol is what we are now considering in the perioperative period. Aniridia, We see it commonly because ours is a tertiary care institute, and it's a genetic disorder with PAX6 mutation and a pan-ocular condition affecting both anterior and posterior segments. Glaucoma occurs in 46 to 70% patients, and these are some of the features which are commonly seen. Corneal pannus, aniridic keratopathy, which is progressive, optic nerve head hypoplasia, foveal hypoplasia, cataract, subluxated lens, microcornea, nystagmus. So treatment options, medical therapy, goniotomy can be done prophylactically, TRAV with MMC, or GDD is the preferred option in these patients. And this particular patient, she did very well with the trabeculectomy, and the pressures were maintained, still maintained on 1 or 2 eye drops, and she was advanced glaucoma. However, since this condition is progressive, and this particular patient, I would say cataract surgery was not the right choice in this patient, because after cataract surgery, the patient, and IOL implantation, the glaucoma progressed, and even Adi implant was done, and there was progression of keratopathy as well, which is a common feature. This particular patient, an iridia with glaucoma, he presented quite early when he was 1 month old, and right eye TRAV was done. In the left eye, he developed RD and underwent VR surgery, and then the AGV. So here our VR surgeon used this oil retention suture. So this eye is doing well till now. So after VR surgery, AGV was performed. Just a word about inflammatory glaucomas. So juvenile idiopathic arthritis and sarcoidosis are the conditions which are associated with glaucoma, and it affects 1 in 1,000 children. Around 10 to 38% of children develop secondary glaucoma, and it is because of the chronic inflammation, synovial angle closure, and maybe steroid-induced rise. Highly variable. Prognosis is highly variable, and aggressive treatment is required with anti-inflammatory therapy and IOP lowering medication. Surgery can be done, and in uveitic patient we use implants because trabeculectomy doesn't work that well. Last is steroid-induced glaucoma. So they are known to induce ocular hypertension, and children are more affected, and ocular hypertensive response is relatively reversible, and if intervened at right time, and prevalence in newly diagnosed childhood glaucoma is 6 to 10% in Indian population. So it is because of the accumulation of GAGs in TM producing biological edema, and there are several other mechanisms, TM obstruction because of the steroid particles, and it also decreases the synthesis of prostaglandins, which regulates the aqueous flow. So there are high responders, moderate responders, and non-responders, and children are more prone to steroid responsiveness as compared to adults, and very young and children less than 10 years and very old people, they are more responsive. And apart from the other risk factors like the patients who are glaucoma suspects or POAG and all. So again, the topical therapy causes the rise of intraocular pressure in most of the patients, but other modes of administration like periocular therapy, inhalational steroids, intravitreal and oral steroids can also cause. Dexamethasone and prednisolone causes a rise in intraocular pressure in almost 40 to 50% of the patients. So the proportion of the patient develop glaucoma in almost 40 to 50%. Difluprednate causes very high pressures, but the proportion of patients developing is less. And then the low strength steroids have less propensity to cause rise in intraocular pressure. So steroids should be stopped. Awareness and use of steroid sparing medications. And in most cases it can be treated medically, but one can perform in very advanced glaucoma surgeries, and now we have MIGS also. So we had this study and retrospective analysis of 156 eyes with secondary childhood glaucoma in our hospital. So most common causes, so we had more of secondary glaucomas, post-vitrectomy, trauma, steroid use, post-PKN uveitis. Among non-acquired, Axenfeld Rieger was most prevalent, followed by aniridia and Peters. And 50% of the patients responded and were controlled on medical management. However, surgical intervention was required in 47%. GDDs were frequently used in post-cataract cases, and overall success achieved in 80% of the patients at 1 year. So the study highlights the need for better understanding and tailored treatment approaches for secondary childhood glaucoma. So to conclude, pediatric secondary glaucoma is a vision-threatening disorder. So you need to have a tailored approach to manage, and a multidisciplinary care is often required. And these patients, since the glaucoma may develop later, so long-term surveillance is required. Correction of, even if you have done surgery, correction of amblyopia and refractive error is a must, and assessment for need of repeat surgeries, because one surgery may not be enough in lifetime. So timely intervention and regular follow-ups can lead to promising outcome for these children. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You covered the topic so beautifully and also highlighted the importance of the glaucoma following cataract surgery, because that is something which, it's often neglected. One tends to forget that one has to call them for follow-up. Lifelong, actually. Thank you so much.
It was a wonderful talk, and I'd just like to ask you two questions. You said about taking a sample at the time of the EUA. Is there any reluctance? Because most often we have found a lot of reluctance in patients spending for a genetic testing. So how do you get around it?
The counseling of the parents and make them understand why you are doing this, and especially if there is a family history. So if there's a family history of glaucoma or any congenital eye disease, they agree to it, and if especially if they're planning future pregnancy, I think that will help them in planning future pregnancy also. So I think if you explain to them, and although it has a cost involved, so sometimes they are not able to pay.
Yes, yes.
But in our institute, sometimes we get funds to do genetic testing. So most of these children, especially congenital glaucoma, they do belong to low social
Yes,
strata.
yes, that's right.
So they do not object that much, especially if the test is being done free. But if there's a cost, they don't get it done.
So at your center, how much is the cost for the genetic testing?
So it is. So there are three types, like single gene, or maybe like that specific gene. If you are very sure that this particular gene may be involved, if it is primary congenital glaucoma, and if you are not very sure and you are doing whole exome sequencing, so single gene may be 5 to 10,000, but whole exome sequencing is 15 to 20,000 rupees. So that way, but somehow we are able to manage it.
It's a very good thing that you are able to do this complete analysis, and it brings out a lot of advantage.
You need to explain, because now we have a department, and I think it's a teamwork of genetic counselor. So we send the patient for genetic counseling. So, and we also explain to them.
Very nice. And you also mentioned about you had a figure of 94% as
Open angles.
that's what you said. I thought it was that after cataract surgery, what is the percentage of glaucoma that you would say?
No, no. After cataract surgery, angle closure glaucoma is very rare nowadays.
Okay,
with
that's
the
what you meant.
advanced microsurgical technique. So most of the glaucoma is
Open
angle.
angle.
So over a period of time, the axial length. So following up the patient with the axial length. as
Yes,
I
yes,
said,
yes.
minus
That's a
20,
must.
minus 25 refractive error they become.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Open angle.
both congenital cataract surgeries and congenital glaucomas, it's not the treatment that you do then. The follow-up has to be till they become at least 18 years of age. And an annual, yes, yes, yes.
Lifelong after cataract surgery.
If anybody has questions with Dr. Sunita, they could ask just now because she's leaving for another session.
We see the child and his
But
One question. You asked, there was a study recently that said that weekly dosage of oral Diamox is as effective as QID. So in children, have you taken?
Yeah, in children I always give the minimum doses. I don't should
No, but they also said that increasing the Diamox to 4 times a day doesn't have any antidote effect. So if oppression is not controlled on daily dosage of
say
Diamox,
for children, for primary congenital glaucoma, it's a surgical disease.
Hmm.
So it is, yes, medication is just a temporary thing.
so you kind of
And if
prepone the surgery if your
in
pressures are
primary congenital glaucoma, you have to operate as soon as possible, whenever the child is fit for surgery. In secondary glaucoma, well, we cannot keep the child on Diamox
For
long.
lifelong.
So you have to operate if the child is requiring oral.
It's true, but there are many children which we see who have a multisystemic problem and they're not fit for surgery at UGA. Even at, like in our hospital, we see a lot of patients with associated cardiological and neurological issues, and we have to delay the surgery a bit. So my question was regarding those patients.
But still, if the patient is having so much systemic problem, then I'm not very sure about giving oral acetazolamide.
Yeah, that is also that's also a limitation.
So you are never,
Surgery, sometimes post-surgery over a period of time, we require antibiotic.
yeah.
And in that time, of course, dorzolamide, topical carbonic anhydrous inhibitors is the first choice. Sometimes beta blockers also I give. What about ripasudil? How often do you consider?
So there are no studies of ripasudil in children, but we do give
We land up using it because
using all the medications, and after 2 years or 3 years, we also give the PG analogs. So they are
so I think sometimes also initially it's only short gap because you have to touch them. But sometimes post-operatively, over a period of time,
Post-operatively, you
need
have to give. But it is also said that children, they tolerate oral acetazolamide. If they are systemically okay, they tolerate it pretty well, even for months
And they're not big enough to complain.
to complain also.
And
We just advise them to have lots of,
Fluid.
bananas, coconut water and all. So I think they tolerate it pretty well. If they are they do not have any other systemic problems.
But our corneal colleagues sometimes say that don't give dorzolamide. It's not very, because as it is, the child is having a little bit of corneal edema. It's not very healthy for the cornea. And they try to say that why don't you give timolol? So what would be your view on that?
Yeah, dorzolamide in diseased corneas is not very good, and especially post-PK glaucoma and all we avoid. So that is the last choice in post-PK glaucoma. But in healthy cornea, like I don't find any contraindication in primary and this PCG, congenital glaucomas.
Like we had a neonate. We had we had a neonate who had bilateral corneal edema, and we diagnosed it as glaucoma. In fact, we had sent it to you. So we had started dorzolamide. Then the cornea specialist said, "Don't give dorzolamide. Give timolol." Remember? And then ultimately the patient went to.
Yeah, rather than timolol, then they give Iobet, betaxolol 0.25% in such a small baby. So such a small baby, and plus you can give oral acetazolamide. Oral acetazolamide doesn't affect the cornea that much, but topical
It
is
does.
going right through. And as you said, if there is evident corneal endothelial failure, like there's a definite corneal edema, so at that stage, definitely avoid the topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors.
In fact, I'll just like to add to what Dr. Sunita has very beautifully narrated is that we should remember that if the child is less than 1 year, the dimensions that we follow for whether it is IOP or whether it is a corneal dia, it has to be age specific. Where like in an abnormal IOP is anything above 17 or 18 in a neonate, and through infancy. Thank you so much.
Pedicloral for, we are using for we are not subjecting the child to complete anesthesia, but pedicloral, but that should also be used under supervision.
but especially post-operative,
Post-operative,
symptoms
yes,
of
yes,
those
yes. But now with that Perkins tonometer, most of the children are very cooperative. Just,
eye care or
eye care.
Eye care.
Eye care.
Actually, they're cooperative till around 6 months to so. But once they get a little older, that's where when they're
It doesn't hurt them, but when you bring something closer to their forehead, also some of them don't want.
But we have been doing it and they are cooperative.
Very
with
nice to see your documentation, UVM anonymity. We should also, we'll end up not using it. Sushmita has been saying they have the UVM, so take it to OT and all.
yeah, especially taking it to the OT. That's a very important
So
thing.
UVM and B-scan, I think these two.
B-scan to definitely
B-scan in OPD can also be done, but UVM in OT. Because you have to differentiate between primary
Dr.
congenital and
Radhika.
secondary developmental glaucomas.
And you capture your photographs of the OT table through the microscope.
Through the microscope.
Nice.
Very nice. Thank you so much.
Okay.